All right, Hasard Lee, man. Appreciate you coming on the podcast. F-35 pilot, F-16 pilot. You got a big presence on YouTube. I checked out some of your videos. I actually hadn't seen them before, but you have quite a large following on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, on all this stuff, and you're doing something really awesome, which is showing people like the more technical side, I guess, of flying, and like it's almost a cooler, different aspect than what we normally see, right?
Yeah, I just want to kind of show people what we see from the cockpit. So I think movies like Top Gun, they're great, but they don't really do a good job of showing what it's like. I mean, same thing probably from your side, the
Yeah.
Transformer movies. I'm sure it's not like that as a JTAC. So it does a great job for drawing audiences in, but it's just like a completely different world that we live in. And I try to give as good of a explanation of that without, saying anything classified.
Being that you're still in the reserves, does the military, is there any kind of issues? Do you have to run anything by the military when you're doing these things? Obviously you're working with some military units and stuff, it's in coordination, so I imagine in some way they support what you're doing.
Yeah, everything I have to run through JAG as well as public affairs. So that adds another wrinkle to it. So if you've noticed, I've started teaming up with a lot of different organizations like the Defense Innovation Unit, 19th Air Force, so that they can provide a little bit of the top cover as well as, they're doing great stuff. So I want to be a part of a team going in and changing things. And for instance, like the Defense Innovation Unit, they are bringing in innovation to the defense space, which is something that we definitely need. So I like being part of those teams.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy now. I was just talking to somebody a minute ago about in the 2020s, media and social media and all this stuff is so different than what it was 10 years ago. The fact that we have fighter pilots that are mounting like GoPros or different cameras within the cockpit to show people, their perspective, this is what it looks like when we're doing this maneuver or whatever, was just kind of unheard of 10 years ago. How is like the Air Force shifting with the times, with this uptick in social media? Like people want to put content out, people want that content. It's obviously a good driver for recruiting and stuff like that, because it's like, hey, I'm showing you what I'm doing every day and this looks pretty badass.
Yeah, it's a tough balance because there is a lot of great content out there, a lot of good opportunities, but you don't want to tell anything that's classified or have OPSEC issues. So it's a delicate balance. I would say the Air Force is kind of leading the charge with that, and they've realized that social media is a tool, and it's something that can be used well, or it can be used poorly. And there are obviously a lot of examples, a lot of landmines out there that you don't want to step on when it comes to social media. But if you do it well, if you do it right, I've been doing this for 5 years, haven't had any issues, which has been really challenging. So knock on wood, hopefully don't screw up here. But you kind of have to have two different brains. You have to have a brain, focused, kind of on the public, and then a brain focused, with what we do. And a lot of it is classified as well. So I think it's kind of a privilege to be able to do it, but it has to be done really methodically. You can't just, blast out stuff on social media. So I get stuff reviewed by JAG as well as public affairs all the time, and they're able to give me the okay on it.
Has there been any kind of content that they're like, nah, man, you can't release that?
Well, I don't come close to the line, I'd say. So I try to stay well clear from it, but sometimes they'll give me perspectives of like, you're allowed to say that, but maybe you shouldn't. And so I usually, just go with what they say. So I would say you don't want to get close to the line.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. It's a one-way door. You can get in a lot of trouble. So it is definitely a risk. But like I said, I've been doing this for 5 years, and not to say something won't happen, but I've gotten pretty good at figuring out where it is and what are some of the hot button items as well.
I mean, if you've been doing it for 5 years, you're almost leading the way, within the Air Force itself as like content creators come. It's just, well, two questions. Well, one, I will say, having been in the Marines, having worked with like JAG and worked with like the public affairs officers and stuff like that, for those that are listening that have never been in the military, in my entire experience in 12 years, public affairs was always like, hey, say what you want to say, but don't speak out of turn. Like, don't speak about things you don't know anything about. Don't say what you want to say, like release classified stuff, obviously. If you were talking about your perspective from your job, that's fine. They never really had an issue with that. They never really told anybody, don't say that. it was always like the issue was when you spoke out of turn when you're talking about something that you don't really have the experience to be like speaking about. You know, does that make sense? Is that kind of your? I think people think
for
that
sure.
it's like a propaganda, like you can only say this. Here's a list of things you're allowed to say, and it's not necessarily like that.
Yeah, I mean that's life. Like you want to be an expert when you're speaking on anything, and so yeah, public affairs they adhere to a bunch of different rules, and we have to follow those as well. So you know, it's just kind of going through those and knowing the rules, dedicating the time to being able to understand the AFIs associated with it, and then bringing in the team. So I have different points of contact out there from the base public affairs on up to Secretary of the Air Force public affairs that I reach out to. So I'm just, you know, part of the team. And, you know, it has been an interesting journey kind of leading the charge because you're right. In 2017, really nobody was doing this stuff. And, you know, I think I've been able to convince them that there's definitely a demand for this. And if done right, it can really do a good job with recruiting, with being able to message different things. For instance, the F-35, it's an extremely capable aircraft. It's a great aircraft, but it's a different paradigm than like the F-16 or F-15. Like back then, you know, F-15, it was all about going Mach 2.5, you know, 60,000 feet. And then with the F-16, it was all about turning tight. The F-35, it's more of a data management system. So you're able to have a lot of situational awareness on what's going on, your stealth. So the enemy doesn't have a lot of SA on you. And then you're able to pass that information to other platforms as well. So it's a extremely capable, great aircraft. But if you look at it through the lens of, you know, an F-15 or F-16, it might not look as good. So being able to explain, for instance, is, you know, really important.
I actually liked your video on the F-35, like the breakdown of, you know, some of the issues that people, I'd honestly like you to expand on that a little bit, because that is a huge thing that people watching military budgets are like, why are we spending so much on this aircraft? Why is it so overblown? It's not capable at all. And I see both sides. You know, obviously, as a taxpayer, you want the government to not just waste money. But at the same time, having been in the military, I know, and having worked with newer technologies and stuff like that, there's a growing pain that comes with that. And you have to break stuff to get to the good stuff, and that costs some money. Can you kind of explain some of the key like pushback against the F-35 and then your counterpoints to those?
I think people would say that it's really expensive, but the price has been going down a lot. So I think last I checked, it was around $80 million a pop now, which is definitely very expensive, but it's on par with some of the other systems out there. So it's an expensive aircraft. You know, I think the biggest issue people have is with the program itself, with having multiple countries and then different military services involved with it as well. And so that can add layers of bureaucracy. So it does take a long time to get things changed. So there are some issues with it, mostly programmatic, and we are moving past that. But I think in terms of capability, it's an awesome aircraft. Like like I was saying, it's stealth, which is really, if you want to have a seat at the table today, you have to be stealth. If you're going against a mid-tier country on up, you got to be stealth. You got to have lots of situational awareness. There's a lot of sensors built into it. It's really difficult to make a stealth aircraft that also has great sensors. And then you have to be able to fuse that information together. When I was flying the F-16, for instance, you know, that aircraft was designed in the 1970s. They were updated from A models to C models. So call it an early 1990s aircraft. Although when I was flying in Korea, those tails were literally built in the late 80s. So they had stacked on new technology on it. So we had 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s technology, and it was just a rat's nest of stuff in there. So the pilot was fusing all that information together. And, you know, we paid the price for that. You were having to spend a lot of time station keeping. And unfortunately, we had, you know, a really high level of CFIT, controlled flight into terrain. So part of that can be G's, blacking out under high G forces, but some of it can be, you know, flying at low altitude and then being so focused on your radar that you run into a mountain. And so with the F-35, they've really gone through that, and it allows the computer to fuse that information together. So when I'm looking on my screen, it's just a green dot if it's a good guy, red dot if it's a bad guy. So it makes it really easy from a pilot perspective. We also have pretty advanced augmented reality on it. So that was something that I had in the F-16 with the JHMICs, and it allowed me to see different information, where my wingman was, where the target was. But the F-35s like that on steroids, so I can see all the bad guys in front of me with symbols over them, all the good guys with symbols over them, even guys on the ground as well. So if they're carrying that equipment, so it really adds a lot for situational awareness, and that allows me to be more of a mission commander, so I can have a higher level of decision making and see the battle space. So that's where the F-35 really excels, is being kind of the quarterback on the battlefield and being able to use all these other assets. Because like F-15s, F-16s, those fourth-gen fighters are going to be around till at least 2050. And right now, 80% of the force is those fourth-gen fighters. So there's not a lot of fifth-gen fighters, just the F-22 and F-35. So it's important that not only are we really good, but that we bring everybody's game up.
You think we'll have the F-16 around for 30 more years?
Yeah. Yeah,
that's insane, right?
I think Sundown got moved to late 2040s.
Wow, man!
And they are buying new F-15EXs, so they're coming off the line right now.
I didn't even realize. I watched the video that you made, the civilian F-16 flight that you took, and I didn't even realize till I watched that the F-16 came out in the 1970s. I thought that was like late 80s technology. I didn't realize it was that old, and to think that it's going for that. I mean, we're going to be flying on. Your kids could be flying the same aircraft that you're flying. It's like the story of the B-1 or B-52 bombers and stuff like that are lasting generations almost. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's crazy how old those aircraft are, and there's only so much you can do. You can't take a 1970s Corvette and get it to race a modern Corvette today. That's been souped up as well. So you can do a lot of different things. Avionics have been upgraded, all of that stuff. But when it comes to the fundamental design, there's only so much you can do. The generators, the airframe, what it can carry, especially if you're talking stealth. Like you can't just put some spray paint on it and make it a stealth aircraft. So it's really important that you have modern, new aircraft. And like you said, the KC-135s, the B-52s, those were built in the 50s and 60s. And we have people today whose grandparents flew the exact same aircraft that they're flying, which is crazy. And believe it or not, those two aircraft are going to keep flying until at least 2060. So 100 years.
Now, when you're talking about an aircraft like the F-16 that came out in the 1970s, it's going to have way more analog kind of technology than like the F-35, which is, all digital. Not all, but a lot. Do we see the F-35 having the same kind of longevity as like an F-16 of being able to fly for the next 50 years? Is it just going to come down to like computer upgrades, changing out motherboard? Is that the new upgrades for aircraft?
Yeah. So I think with the F-16, they've done a phenomenal job of keeping that in the fight, because when it first came out in the 70s, it was kind of John Boyd's vision. I think I have his book here somewhere. Marines actually probably know a lot about John Boyd, but it's just meant to turn, to have some AIM-9 Papa heat-seeking missiles on the wingtips and to turn. And now we've put all this electronics on it. When I was flying missions in Afghanistan, we'd have to hit the burner a little bit just to stay on the tanker, because we had so much stuff on the aircraft. And so, the F-35 has been designed with a long lifespan in mind. So I think we're going to keep building them till like 2050, and they'll probably fly for at least 20 years after that. So the F-35 is going to be around for a long time. It was designed from the very beginning to be around for a long time. So there's a lot of upgrades that we can still do to it.
Is there anything that you like about the F-16 over the F-35? Having piloted both, having flown hundreds, if not thousands of hours in both, like what's like your favorite about each?
It's still my favorite aircraft. The F-16 is the aircraft that I grew up wanting to fly. So it's an amazing aircraft. It's a little bit more manual. So it's like that 90s Corvette versus a modern one now with paddle shifters. It's like the F-35 has auto throttles. F-16 had a very, very basic autopilot. So it's a little bit more manual flying, a little bit more visceral. You can really see who's the better pilot when it comes to that. You can still see that with the F-35, but I would say the gap between an average pilot and a really good pilot in F-16 is greater than in the F-35 because we have a lot of automated processes. So in the F-35, you're a little bit more of a systems manager. Now, you're still doing a lot of, flying, hand flying, for all the people that think that, it's just going to be automated away and, pilots are a thing of the past. We're still not even close to that. But the F-16 is a little bit more of a manual aircraft, and I miss it. So, like you said, I got a chance to go up in the first civilian F-16s, which is crazy now that there are civilian F-16s out there. And they bought this company, Top Aces 29, from Israel. They're now flying against Air Force aircraft and Navy aircraft as adversary air. And so it's cool being back in the cockpit, really getting that sensation. And those are old A models. Yeah, in terms of capability, it's not even close. F-35 is much more capable aircraft. That's the aircraft that you want to go into a fight. So as fighter pilots, we just want to be as capable as possible. So there is something to be said about, going for a joyride in the F-16, but when it comes to a real fight, you absolutely want to be an F-35 or any sort of fifth-gen fighter.
Mm-hmm. I like your analogy there of, bringing it back to like cars. Yeah, of course, I'm going to take that classic Corvette on a weekend cruise and stuff. But if I'm going to the track to race it, I'm bringing out the newest one with the newest motor, the newest technologies. That's a great way to put it. It may be fun to drive the other one, but when we're coming down to business, this one's the better one at today's business. Yeah,
you bet.
When you got into the civilian F-16, which first off is crazy, right? That you can just, hey, we'll just call them up and, I get it that it transferred from our military to their military and then it got decommissioned and then they purchased them and stuff like that. It's just such a wild process, and that it's like possible, like, oh, I'll just go buy an F-16. And these guys obviously are all professionals, bought a fleet of them. For those that don't know, they bought a fleet of them, like you said. Now they do these aggressor aircraft and stuff like that. But when you get an F-16 on the civilian side, what does it not come with? How different? You said it was an A model, so it's obviously going to be different than the one you flew. But how much different was it from the one you flew?
So I'm definitely not an expert on what they have, but they had to go through all kinds of hurdles with the State Department. Even though they're old F-16s, the State Department looks at it as they're F-16s, and we're still flying F-16s. So, how are civilians allowed to do it? So they've had to go through years of paperwork to be able to get them. And they're actually making them really advanced. So they're putting in AESA radars, which is it's a revolutionary upgrade to radar. So the old radar, mech scan radar, probably what people think of with a dish going back and forth. That's what I flew, even with the most advanced U.S. aircraft, U.S. F-16s, when I was flying at Shaw Air Force Base with the Block 50s. Old radar, it's not that great. F-35 has a ESA radar, actively electrically scanned array. And basically you're using magnets to be able to steer the beam, and it can steer thousands of times a second as opposed to maybe like one time a second with the radar. So it's much, much, much better. And they're actually putting AESA radars into these F-16. So they're going to be really formidable aircraft, and they're using Scorpion helmet systems. So they're going to have the augmented reality. So we want them, as F-35 pilot, we want them to be as advanced as possible. So that's the problem right now with some of these other aircraft, adversary aircraft. They're flying like, older Russian, based aircraft, and they just can't give us the level of threat that we need for a near peer adversary. That's what the F-35, F-22 is designed for, going against a near peer adversary who have advanced aircraft. And you can only get that with with a great aircraft that you're flying against. And it's also not great for us to fly as Red Air against ourselves, because these are expensive aircraft to fly. And every hour that you fly, you want to be training Blue Air tactics. So Blue Air tactics, very, very different from flying as Red Air tactics. So if you fly up as Red Air, like we do a lot of times now, that's, you're getting some airmanship, but it's essentially a waste when it comes to being able to develop your tactics.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's like I imagine it's like anything else. It's one of those things where you have to constantly be doing the task, especially the small task, or you become rusty at it. And what may seem on the outside looking in like you're still really efficient doing something, you can be way better at it if you got a couple more reps doing whatever task it was. Is that how you would kind of
put it? For sure. And being a reservist now, it's really tough. So I fly the F-35 like 60 times a year now. So about once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's a lot more challenging to be able to stay current. So I'm going up against guys that, you know, are flying every single day. And so I've had to kind of rein it back a little bit, be really efficient with my time. So, and generally, if I'm out of the jet for more than about a week, I can definitely feel some rust when I hop back in the aircraft. So it is challenging, and you want to spend all that time on blue air tactics, really getting better, because that's what's going to save you when you actually go to war.
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about adversary aircraft and tactics and stuff like that. We obviously want to keep as up to date on what the enemy's doing and, you know, their weapons and all that stuff as possible. When you look at this like action in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine and how there's like an actual air war, you know, especially at the beginning, there was legitimate dogfights. There's aircraft being shot down. So many videos coming out of air defense on both sides, shooting down everything. As a fighter pilot, how do you process that information? What do you do with that? Do you look at it and you go, okay, that system is as capable as we thought? Is that how you're looking at it? Or kind of go through, as a professional fighter pilot, how do you view this war footage coming out when you're seeing actual capabilities and actual tactics in play?
Well, it's a lot more data points. So, you know, you have an actual war going on with pretty advanced militaries. So it's not something that we've seen recently. So last 20 years, we've been really involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there wasn't a big air threat. We had air superiority. So it's really interesting to be able to see all that, to be able to get the data points there. So, you know, it is going to affect our tactics quite a bit. So intelligence has to go through and they have to figure, you know, reverse engineer these systems. And then, so it's a trickle down effect. But, you know, just being able to see some of the footage as a pilot, it gives you reference points. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we look for. You know, when we're debriefing our sorties, we're going out. Usually there's a force that's simulating red air, and they're trying their best to simulate the red air, but they're just going off of, you know, what our intelligence has assessed that the adversary country has done. So now we have a whole bunch of data points for them to be able to assess that, and it trickles down to the blue air.
Yeah, I mean, as a ground guy, I look at the armor battle, and I'm like, I was holding Russia's armor way up on a higher pedestal than I should have been. You know, it has been truly devastating for their ground military. Do you feel the same way about their air force? Like, how is their air force comparing? How is their air force, you know, doing the fight? Is it what you thought it would be? Is it worse, better? What do you think?
Well, I'll just say, I think the military has known that Russia has had a pretty antiquated military for a long time. And so they were a superpower. They had a huge military, but then they didn't really maintain them through the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So on paper, they look really good. I think most professionals in the military knew that they weren't as good in real life as they were on paper. So I think
Mm-hmm.
they're getting exposed. You know, when you go to combat, it's a lot of the boring stuff that really allows you to win. It's the ability to communicate, secure communication. You're seeing all the generals getting picked off. So, you know, when we would go to exercises like Red Flag, which we'd have hundreds of aircraft flying at once, we'd have the Army participating, Navy participating, you know, Marines. I think Marines were the first F-35s there in 2015. We'd bring everybody together, and we would find a lot of issues. Like day one,
Mm-hmm.
day two, there was a lot of trouble. People just communicating, getting up on link 16, all those kind of basic things. And you're seeing Russia screw up a lot of those things, especially early on in the conflict. And you know, they're pretty good at marketing what they do. So they market their hypersonics. They market, you know, the Su-50 as well. So they're good at marketing, but
Yeah.
you know, they're missing a lot of pieces, and you're seeing them get exposed.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the people are making a big deal about the hypersonic weapons, and I mean, it obviously it's something to keep an eye on, but I don't think it's to the level of what, you know, the media is making it out to be. I don't think the danger is what, I mean, it could be, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn on that, but it just doesn't seem like it's having experience in that world, in the fire sport world, and understanding like munitions and stuff. I don't know what, I mean, the hypersonic obviously brings a different capability of moving extremely fast outside of like our ability to defend it. But I don't believe they have a whole fleet of hypersonic weapons that could really do anything. At best, they probably have, a handful or whatever, and they use them strategically to be like, hey, look, we have this. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Mass is an important factor. And, same thing. If you go to, and I think pretty much anybody can do this. You can, when you go to Fort Worth, if you want to take a tour of the factory, you can just go online and try to sign up for it. But if you go to the factory, they have 200 F-35s being built at once in the factory. It's incredible. Wow. We have I think the 700th F-35 rolled off the line a couple months back. That is an extremely formidable force. And we're bridging partnerships. So here at my base, we have Dutch, Danish, Norwegian, Italian. We train South Koreans, Japanese. All these countries know how to fly the F-35. So if we want to go to war with them, it's going to be pretty seamless, at least from F-35 perspective. So laying that groundwork is really important, and having the necessary mass to be able to do that. So if you have just a handful of aircraft, it looks pretty good on the glossy brochure. I think it's good that you and a lot of experts are starting to kind of blur the lines with where the media is, because I think the media gets tricked pretty easily by talking about hypersonics. All hypersonics are the same. Well, hypersonics have been around, since at least ICBMs, and ICBM goes hypersonic. So, there's a big difference between that and more of a cruise missile that's able to maneuver and go hypersonic. And there's a big difference between just having one of those and having 10,000 of those.
For sure.
It's really easy to market. And I think professionals, such as yourself, are a lot harder to dupe than somebody who doesn't have that integrated background.
I'm sure it's frustrating, right? To be a service member and know that what you're seeing get pushed out is inaccurate or out of context or missing, there's something not right about it. It's frustrating. And I imagine that's the same kind of frustration you felt when you hear all the talking heads pushing back against the F-35, right?
Yeah. One thing that I go back to is when I think Malaysian aircraft was shot down by a SA-11, Russian SA-11, and there were talking heads on the news, like professional experts. So they'd have airline pilots come on and say, "Oh yeah, we should put chaff in these airlines." And the people I was around were not fighter pilots, and so they're like, "Yeah, we should put chaff in these aircraft." And it's like, wow, this is crazy that this person is being portrayed as an expert, which they are as an airline pilot, but not at all as a combat pilot. There's no way chaff would do anything significant with a RCS, radar cross section of an airline. And that's my expertise. I know that super well. And how many areas out there are similar so-called experts, kind of leading us down the wrong rabbit hole. So that's why I really, enjoy, coming on podcasts like this and seeing experts, true experts out there. And I think social media has really given rise to be able to allow these people who recently retired or joined the reserves to be able to keep, educating the public.
For sure. That's one thing I've mentioned on the podcast multiple times is like the institutional knowledge that we lose every time somebody leaves the service, even if they only did 4 years or if they retired. You picked up some information during your time in that's important. And the reality is, we all know the after action reviews don't fully capture the reality of whatever it was that we're reviewing, right? That's a lot of commands don't like to have negative stuff in after action reviews because they want it to be like, hey, look how great we did. I'm an awesome commander. Promote me, kind of deal. And I think guys like myself or guys like, a page like Goons Up or something like that, or, that are putting information out there and trying to spread the knowledge or just spread the culture of that job field. You can't beat that. That's what younger guys need, especially as we transition away from this time of war. We've been at war for 2 decades and now we're not. And our NCOs and our ground combat elements, and pilots as well, aren't getting the kind of combat experience and training and stuff that we got for 20 years. So it has to be supplemented somehow. And I think this is a good way to do it. I think it's just a good way to pass that information. And I think politicians are slowly starting to learn that you can't bullshit us really anymore. You have to be transparent, because if you don't, someone's going to go on TikTok and make a video calling you out, and it's going to go viral. Then you're going to look like an asshole. It's like, so I don't know. I think it's
on that point. That's a big shift that I've seen from a lot of defense companies in the past. They didn't really care about that PR aspect. They just didn't want any negative stuff coming their way. But I see they're putting a lot more effort into being able to educate the public, being able to explain things. Like me going with top aces and kind of showing what they're doing. So I think that's a really important thing. And I see a real big shift in the industry of just, don't care what the public thinks. We're just going to do our own thing we actually need to explain what we're doing and make sure that it makes sense, because the public and service members, actually have a lot of say. And so that's why I enjoy doing these videos, is being able to get a warfighter perspective on some of these programs, because that's ultimately who's going to use it. So usually the people selling the politicians, they're, pretty far away from the battlefield. So being able to actually say, is this something that I would use is pretty cool to see.
What made you get into like digital marketing and social media, and making these videos and releasing this content? Because I'm sure you're like everybody else that does it. When you first get ready to, do your first post or set up your first page, you're like, what am I doing? I feel like an idiot.
Yeah.
Like my friends are going to make fun of me.
Yeah. It's been a long, circuitous journey. So I guess where it really started, because, I didn't have any social media before, maybe a Facebook account with a couple hundred friends on it, but that's it. No Instagram, none of that, no Twitter, none of that stuff. But when I came back from Afghanistan, 2016, that's when I came to Luke to train in the F-35, and Memorial Day was coming up, and they wanted someone who, had been in combat recently to speak at this. It was this little city north of Phoenix called Carefree. And so I gave a speech to a couple hundred people there, and there was a teacher in the crowd who was like, that's great. Nobody in my class really knows anybody in the military. Can you come and talk to my class? So I talked to her class, and I started talking to these different schools. And I was like, there's probably a better way to do this. Like, clearly all these kids have a lot of questions. They're really curious about how to be a fighter pilot. They all think, if they have glasses that they can't fly, which is, a huge misconception. And so I was like, well, why don't I start a podcast so that I can explain this to everybody at once? And then, so once I decided, all right, podcast, as like there's a lot that comes to it. You can't just speak into a microphone. Like you now have to promote it. And I was like, what's the best way to do that? Well, probably social media. So I remember being on my computer on like a browser on Instagram, trying to sign into an account. And then my wife coming by and being like, that's stupid. Like you need to use your phone to use Instagram. So that's where I started. And, I just applied the principles that I learned as a pilot to doing this. So, you talk to the after action debrief. As fighter pilots, debriefing is the most important thing. So I was just, assessing what worked, what didn't, and started iterating my way through it, because there was really nobody else really doing it at the time who was still in the military. So I had to, learn a lot of lessons, and it's been fun. I mean, that's probably my favorite thing, is just learning new things. And so it's been a fun journey to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, I bet that it would have been some weird ground to cover at the beginning when there's no examples to look at for people in the military actively promoting content about the military. Because everything you learn while you're in is like, hey, you can't be in uniform and promote things. You can't do this. You can't do that. You got to sign the social media page 11, make sure you don't do anything stupid, so there's that. At any moment you could actually like ruin your career over something stupid. So that would have been very nerve wracking at the beginning when you're trying to, you had to figure social media out. You didn't even know how to log into Instagram. That's wild.
Right. Yeah. I guess I was worried about it, but I thought this was worth talking about. There's not many people in the military talking about it. There's all these random people. The best that you could do would be like, at the time was, somebody who had retired maybe 5-10 years ago. And their data really wasn't current because they hadn't flown fifth generation fighters. So, I thought it was worth getting out. And especially for the students, like there are so many misconceptions that the students had about the military in general. Forget being a fighter pilot.
Mm-hmm.
I think they just kind of saw this organization that was a little bit scary, that wasn't accessible. So yeah, I decided, this is worth my career. And so I was like, yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen, when the 06, hears about this and listens to it, what's going to happen. So, I don't think I've told many people this, but I wrote myself a letter before I published the first episode. I was like, well, this is worth doing. It might get me in a lot of trouble. I had gotten approval, but, I didn't know where it would go. So I wrote myself a letter. I was like, this might get myself in trouble. This might ruin my career, but I think it's worth it. And knowing everything I know right now, I'm going to do it.
That's awesome, man. I think it's great. I think the military overclassifies stuff, and I think they're too secretive about stuff they don't need to be. You know what I'm saying? I think there's no reason why the public shouldn't know about a lot of the stuff that the military does, a lot of the stuff that the military has. I mean, the public's funding it. As long as we're not getting down into the actual like tactics and how, how it comes to be at the end of the sword or whatever you want to say, that's different. But there's so much information out there that's just classified for no reason, or things get talked about in a classified briefing, even though it's not classified, but you can't talk about it outside of that. Anyways, it's like
for sure. I would say there are two issues with that. One is things are overclassified, and what that does is it prevents other people from being able to be other military members to be a part of it. So, everything is so compartmentalized that if the Air Force classified something, even, somebody in the Navy who has similar clearances, they can't talk. And so you don't have that communication, which is, really important. And I've seen it happen a lot where things are overclassified and kind of everybody is siloed doing their own thing. And then there's a secondary thing of there's a lot of things that aren't classified that just aren't talked about. And, public affairs is only talking about a very, very small subsection of what's going on. And generally it's not, there aren't war fighters that are, in public affairs. There's not fighter pilots. I'm sure there are some, but I haven't seen any public affairs office with fighter pilots in it or JTACs in it or anything like that. So their perspective is going to be completely different than, somebody who is actually pulling the trigger somewhere. So they're not going to be able to fully tell the story. The only person that is going to be able to do that is an actual warfighter themselves. So you can either go and interview them, but a lot of those are kind of processed interviews that don't really, talk about much, or you can empower the people. And I think that's ultimately what's been happening for the last, 50 years is you're empowering the people to, you're pushing the decision-making down. People are going to make mistakes, but ultimately is getting that information out more important or less? Well, there's a lot of recruiting issues right now. I think if you're able to build that relationship with different people in the military, if you're able to build a relationship with a JTAC and literally be able to ask one, hey, what's it like calling in airstrikes, as opposed to, watching some movie that's kind of full of crap, like that's so much better. That's so much better. So, that's the benefit. The risk is you're going to have people screw up and they're going to say stupid things and they're going to say political things and they're going to get in trouble. So, I think social media is so powerful that you can't get rid of it. People are going to be, tweeting about things no matter what. So I'd say embrace it and find a way to work together. And that's kind of my mission right now is finding a way to merge those two worlds. And it's really difficult. Like, worrying about OPSEC, worrying about classification while still telling the message. It's really challenging, but there is a way to do it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've had people reach out to me, multiple people. I've had people tag me and post on Reddit like, hey, if you need to hear about fire support, check out this podcast. Or I'll message somebody and be like, if they have questions and they send them to me, I'll try to respond and give them as much information as I can. I'm obviously out of the service. But what we've run into is because of no draft, no one knows about the military unless their family's in the military. And even someone that's in the military, or let's say my sister, She doesn't know what I'm talking about in the military. She doesn't know what it was like to be in the Marines or to do the job I did. She could probably tell people that the name of the job, but she can't describe it. And I think there's this weird stigma. You know, I saw it when I was in college. I got out of the Marines and I used my GI Bill to go to school. And everybody just thinks everyone's a trigger puller on the ground getting into like crazy combat. I'm like, no, man. I'm like 99% of the military never sees like combat. You know, and that's including infantry guys. You know, a lot of times guys in the infantry don't even see combat. They may go to a combat zone, but no one's shooting at them. Or it's like the perspective is so skewed. And I always try to remind people, like, remember during the pandemic, they brought out those 2 Navy ships. You know, you got the Hope and the Mercy. That's the other thing that no one ever talks about because it's not cool. You're not going to make a Hollywood movie about a Navy hospital ship going to South America and giving a ton of shots and, you know, and helping people out and all this stuff. It's just not there. But that's something that's done every day. You know, there's humanitarian missions every day that are happening, but no one really knows about that. And I try to convey that, like, any job you want to do in the real world, they have it in the military. You know, there's almost every job is on both sides of the fence. You can do it in the military as well, along with other things that aren't available, obviously, in the real world. And I think the rise of social media and I think it's like a stupid term, but like the military influencer kind of culture is that guys and gals that are joining nowadays can go into the recruiter's office and be like, I want this specific job. Because they know what that specific job is. Because they looked on Instagram and they follow a page that talks about that specific job all the time. Whereas when I joined in 2006, I read Marine Sniper by Carlos Hathcock, you know, and watched some Discovery Channel freaking documentaries. That was kind of, my dad was in the military, but it was still like, you don't have that same kind of like impression where you can actually learn in depth, like, oh, these guys get to do this. This is their mission. This is how they kind of work together, you know? So I think what you're doing is great, man. I think that's kind of like, I think that's what we need. And I think that could help recruiting. I don't know. I mean, what's your take on that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it definitely will. It already is. You know, I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot since I was like 5 years old. I didn't even talk to one really. I went to an air show, you know, maybe talked to one for like 5 minutes, but I didn't really have an in-depth conversation until I was already at the Air Force Academy. Mm-hmm. So I went to a year of New Mexico Military Institute because I didn't get in right away. So I had to spend, you know, a year there. Then I went to the academy. That was the first time. So I was already committed to at least 5 years, you know, by that point. And I had known that I'd want to be a fighter pilot this whole time, which is pretty crazy to think about. And now you can just go follow somebody on Instagram or, you know, YouTube or something like that. So I don't know if these people are influencers or whatever, but they are, you know, just random people that are putting out their, you know, what they're doing in their lives. So I think the demo team has the demo teams for like the F-35, F-16, Blue Angels, that kind of stuff. I think they do a pretty good job of being able to show, you know, what that career field does. And, you know, if I had my way, I'd say every single career field should have at least you know, somebody representing it. And maybe it's not an individual person, maybe it's the career field and you pass the account around to different people and, you know, you can get it checked by public affairs or whatever like that to make sure that nothing inappropriate is put out there. But that's the way I would do it, so that each career field has some sort of, you know, account that people can follow.
Yeah, because I think a big fear of people considering joining is they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. So if you can like lift that mask of, you know, of the unknown and show like, here's what the actual kind of day to day is, you know, here's what we actually do when we're working, you know, that's an awesome opportunity. When you were at the Air Force Academy, so I had Andrew Bustamante on a few episodes ago. He was a Air Force nuclear officer and he was also a CIA agent. And he was talking about if you go to the Air Force Academy, you almost have to like fight to not become a pilot. He's like, that's kind of like almost everyone there is there to be a pilot. Almost everyone there wants to be a pilot. He was like, I was within the minority of people that really did not want to get in the cockpit. That was not my gig. Would you agree with that sentiment? That's kind of the Air Force Academy is a good route to a cockpit.
It is a route to the cockpit. It is not, I don't think it's the right one for most people, actually. Like it is a great way to be a fighter pilot. They have a lot of pilot slots that they give out. I mean, it depends year to year, but it's generally pretty high. Definitely back in the day, like back in the 90s, before I was there, like if you didn't want to be a pilot and you were pilot qualified, you had to go and talk, I think, to the wing commander. Like you had to talk to the 1-star general and plead your case to not be a pilot. It changed when I was there. I mean, I was there still a while back, 2005. There were definitely people that didn't want to be pilots and they could go their route, but most people wanted to be pilots. I think that's kind of what the Air Force is known for.
Yeah.
Now it's merged with the Space Force, so there's people that want to do the Space Force, so they don't want to be pilots. So it was changing when I was there, but I think most people want to be pilots. Now, I don't think it's the best way for most people because ROTC is they do that over 1,000 colleges. So if you want to go to the academy, you know, a lot of people ask, should I go to the academy? If you're hardcore in the Air Force, and you know, a lot of people lose their pilot qualification health-wise. So I mean, I was boxing there the day before my big physical. I ruptured my eardrum, and so that led me down this path of having to get a bunch of waivers for that. But a lot of people, you know, they find a heart murmur or something like that, and they're out. And after your sophomore year, you're committed for 5 years. So I tell people if they are fully committed to the Air Force and you know, they're want to go in a hardcore route, then go to the academy. But ROTC is at over 1,000 different schools, so you can live in all these different locations. You can do a bunch of different majors that isn't offered at the academy. You know, that's a great way to do that. And if you graduate from college, you can do OTS, officer training school. Or one thing that I didn't know was the Guard. So when I went to pilot training, there's a guy next to me. I was like, hey, what do you want to fly? He's like, I'm flying the A-10. And I was like, you're flying the A-10? What does that mean? He's like, I signed up for the Guard. So as soon as I make it through, I'm going back to my unit, staying there for 20 years. So the Guard is a fantastic way because you know the aircraft that you're going to fly prior to going to pilot training. Now you top 50%. A lot of people still end up washing out, or we had 4 A-10 pilots have to go to KC-135s because they didn't make that 50% cut. But there's a whole bunch of different ways to becoming a pilot. It's not just the academy.
Yeah, for sure. With the A-10, you bring that up. That's like the aircraft that a lot of people, when they push back on the F-35, they're like, get rid of the F-35, get more A-10s, upgrade the A-10. That's the ground guy's best friend or whatever. Which I will admit, as a JTAC, the A-10 is super awesome, obviously. However, the pilots are some of the worst to work with. I mean, for all my A-10 guys out there,
really?
I hate to say that. And it's because I'm a Marine JTAC, so I'm not used to working with the A-10 guys just want to do everything. They want you to be like, here's where the target is, here's where I am, do your thing. And that's just not the Marine Corps way of doing fire support. You know what I'm saying? Like we're trying to bring in artillery at the same time. So, hey, man, I don't want to have to explain why I'm telling you to hold in this airspace. Just go over there and do it. You know, which is something that we would have to deal with sometimes. Love working with the guys, but some of them were an issue and we always explain that to our new Marine JTACs. We're like, hey guys, we'd go out to Gila Bend and do controls out there. We're like, hey guys, you know, we got some A-10s coming on. You guys haven't worked with them yet. They're not going to do -2 readbacks. They're not going to do this. They're not going to do that. Just be ready for it. And, you know, roll with it because it's fine. You know, if you think something's unsafe, obviously say something, but you know, that's just their tactics. So we're going to flex with them. You know, it was just something we always had to brief guys on. But what I'm getting at is the A-10 is something everybody kind of pushes back against the F-35. They're like, hey, bring in the A-10 because it's what everybody on the ground wants. Kind of true, I guess. And then we also saw, like in Syria, when that was starting to kick up with ISIS, they started bringing back prop aircraft to support some of these operations. And for a little bit, there was a lot of people online talking like, why don't we have more of these like slower prop aircraft, bring back some of these older aircraft that are still capable that may be better suited to like control ground fires or do close air support or be a forward air controller airborne rather than a guy in a jet flying back and forth that's going almost too fast to, you know, I can loiter over the target real slow and keep an eye on it all the time. You know, you see what I'm saying? What's your kind of take on that?
I mean, different tools
for sure
for different missions. So I think I mean, I think it really goes down to what we're doing politically, like the national defense strategy. Everything trickles really down from that. And so, uh, the one that came out in 2018, I don't think I haven't read the new one, but 2018 was the last one, and it was saying that biggest threats are uh, North Korea, Iran, uh, some non-state actors, and then Russia and China. So it was not saying that Iraq or Afghanistan uh, was in there. So it really depends. So if you're doing these kind of Iraq, Afghanistan type conflicts, then yeah, that would be great. And the A-10 is fantastic at CAS, and as a pilot, they can spend all of their brain bites just worrying about CAS, getting really great at it. And that's probably to your point. They're super good at close air support. And so when you're really competent at something, you kind of, want to do things your way. So that's probably, some of the pushback that you got from them, because they're just really good at close air support, because they can spend all day of the week just studying close air support. Whereas an F-16 pilot, you're kind of a jack of all trades, worrying about, BFM dogfighting, SEAD, suppression of enemy air defense, a little bit of close air support as well. AI, air interdiction as well. So there's all these different mission sets. Same thing with the F-35. So many different mission sets. So yeah, if you're doing a 1v1 comparison against an F-16 or F-35 against A-10, yeah, A-10 is going to be great in a Iraq, Afghanistan type scenario, which is where most people have experience there. So it'd be interesting to get somebody on the podcast who's fighting in Ukraine right now, because I know a lot of the like Su-25s, a lot of those different aircraft that are flying low, they're getting shot by man pads. A lot of people talk to, the man pads in Iraq back in Desert Storm in the 1990s didn't shoot down, too many aircraft. Well, those were first generation man pads. So they weren't talking about some of the modern stuff that, is a lot more accurate, a lot more lethal. So if you're flying close to the ground and in a advanced environment, you're going to get shot at, and you're probably going to get hit quite a bit. So that's definitely a consideration there. Another thing is there's a lot of important mission sets out there. Obviously, close air support is a great mission set, one of the most meaningful that I've done in Afghanistan. But I would say for the F-35, for the F-16 Block 50s, which is what I was flying before, SEAD is super important. So you're seeing Russia going into Ukraine. They didn't do a great job of taking out the surface-to-air missile sites. So that you can see how critical that is to do, and they didn't do a good job of it. So you need to have good SEAD assets to be able to take out those surface-to-air missile sites. You need to have good air-to-air fighters out there as well, like the F-22, to be able to do this. So it's this integrated team to be able to clear the battle space. So yeah, A-10, great aircraft, but I would say, and it might fit well, but do it from the perspective of how well does it fit into, going against Russia, going against China, especially PACAF, really long distances involved there. So you can't really have a slow aircraft. So it's just, different priorities. And then we also have a limited amount of money. So, where do you want to put that money?
That's what I was going to say is, with the limited money, we have to kind of look at niche aircraft like an A-10 or one of these like slower loitering aircraft that can do ISR or maybe drop whatever light ordnance or whatever. Or do we want to spend the money on something that's multifaceted like the F-35 that can do that close air support, air to air, can do the battle coordination? I mean, it's a tough gamble. I think a lot of the proponents say, hey, cut out one F-35 and you just funded X many A-10s or X many of whatever, insert your thing. But yeah, it's a tough, I don't know, man. You almost have to be a fortune teller. You got to look into the future and see what do we actually need. And I think the F-35s, the F-22s, and I think that the development of these fifth generation aircraft and like making improvements of them are keeping us like in a good level. I don't know. I just think we're at a really good level right now, and I think we have a lot of general aircraft. So I get the people that are saying like, hey, why don't we have more of these niche aircraft that can be used in certain areas? It's just for the decision makers, I guess it's tough, right? I mean, it's a tough spot to be in.
It is tough. And I would encourage people to I went to Nellis Air Force Base and did a tour of an A-10, but I mean, this was with an operational test pilot. So he was explaining, all the stuff that they're doing in an unclassified environment. And so I think people would be pretty interested to see how they're shifting. So they're not planning on doing a lot of strafing, because
Yeah.
you're going to get shot by a manpad because you're pointed, a predictable path going super close to the ground. So I would say, the gun, everybody loves the gun. Like A-10 has done a fantastic job. If you're going to Iraq, Afghanistan, if that's your AOR, keep the A-10. Or, as SOF, I think they selected the air tractor, like a weaponized air tractor as their future aircraft for close air support. So I think for any sort of major conflict, you got to take out strafing and you got to assess the aircraft flying above a predetermined altitude. But yeah, it's a cool video. It's just a tour of an A-10. But yeah, listen to this A-10 weapons officer who's an operational test pilot right now. He's talking about we're seeing the A-10 as fifth-gen support. So yeah, I'd encourage that.
As you've seen like attacks in Ukraine, aircraft being shot down with manpads and different kind of anti-air assets, has it made the military look at our countermeasures and go, maybe they're adequate, they're not adequate, because the average person is going to think, well, just hit the flares, like the guy you were talking about earlier with the airliner. Oh, just hit chafe real quick and we'll be good. And that's not the reality. Like the reality is that these manpads now are so technologically advanced, they'll just stay locked onto you no matter what. In some cases, how do you fight that?
Well, I think you have to stay. I think the easiest way with manpads is to stay out of their WEZ, weapon engagement zone. So flying above them. So if you're flying close, it just takes. I mean, even an AK-47 round can shoot you down. So you want to stay pretty far away from that. We've known that for quite some time. So doing that, making sure that you're stealth at that point to be able to not get shot down by the surface to air missiles that can go much higher and much further. So yeah, I think like I said earlier, there's a lot of data coming out of Ukraine. I think the military, it takes a while to process. So I can process stuff on my individual level, but I think to come, in it with an integrated solution to these are the key lessons that we've learned in Ukraine. This is how we're going to, change things going forward. From an integrated perspective, I think that's going to take some time to do, and definitely the wheels are turning on that. So, there's just a lot of lessons to learn from Ukraine, but I would say one of the big ones is you don't want to get close. Those manpads are everywhere, and they're pretty lethal.
So I feel like I may get some pushback for this, but I feel like the days of the fighter pilot may be numbered. You know what I'm saying? I feel like we're seeing the implementation of drone aircraft. I mean, they've got a drone tanker out there refueling aircraft now. I feel like, and you can tell me if I'm way off base or whatever, but I feel like what's going to happen is right now we have our Air Force is mainly manned pilots, and we have drones that help out with ISR, with that surveillance and stuff like that. At some point, I feel like it's going to become one pilot, manned pilot, with their 3 other drone aircraft flying with them, and they're kind of controlling whatever's going on. And then at some point, we're going to be like, why do we even have the guy up there? Just pull him out. That's too dangerous. Because if he gets shot down, now we got to go rescue him, and there's all this other stuff. We could just put a drone up there. Do you see that happening? Do you see a day when kids are like, Grandpa, he was the last fighter pilot,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, someday for sure. I think, at some point, I don't know when that will happen, but it's not even close right now. Not even close. Combat is the most dynamic environment in the world. So when we go, I think the biggest misconception that people have about flying fighters is it's this like 1v1 cage match. You're just going up, dogfighting. I mean, Top Gun pretty much did that, 4 aircraft going into this, this threat country. That's crazy. We go in with 100 different aircraft, and each aircraft has their own specialty. And it's not even aircraft, like it's multi-domain. So you're talking about space, cyber, you're talking about guys on the ground, you're talking about ships, missiles, all these things integrated tightly, and things go wrong, and it really takes a person to be able to be creative with their solution. To, there's going to be some fallout to bring this, team together to be able to solve a tactical problem. And the enemy, on the other hand, they're doing everything they can to disrupt your decision making. So, if you're going against a drone that really only knows how to attack one way, they're going to find a way to attack that. And I think a lot of these tech companies are figuring this out. So like Tesla with their, automated driving, they were saying 5 years ago that we're going to have fully autonomous vehicles. Even their autopilot is called full self-driving. It definitely doesn't do that maybe on a highway, definitely not through a city, definitely not through a shopping center. And that's without an adversary. What if I were to tell you, all right, I want you to design software to be able to take a car from LA to New York, through New York. And then I said, I need you to prevent that vehicle from getting there. You could do whatever you want. You can spray paint the lines into concrete barriers. You could use lasers to jam their cameras. I'm sure you could find a way to prevent it from getting to that destination, because it's exponentially more difficult to do that. So I think humans and AI drones, I think the future is us working together. We have some huge strengths that we're able to overcome. And one of them is being able to creatively solve problems. Computers aren't great at doing that. They mostly use linear regression. So they're going to, just see what happened in the past and then forecast that for the future. So it's really us finding ways to work together, which is really difficult. You see that with a lot of autopilots on commercial airlines right now. So the autopilot will kick off at the worst time and say, oh, I'm overloaded, I can't do this. Here's the pilot. And the pilot, meanwhile, has gotten complacent because they're used to the autopilot doing that. So now they have to step into this crazy situation and solve it for the AI. So instead of seeing, all the AI and tech companies saying, and there's one tech CEO about 6 months ago who said, basically, fighter pilots are going to be obsolete in 5 years. That's not how fast the DoD operates. There's no way. I would bet any amount of money that's not going to happen. And I guess there's some proponents on the fighter pilot side that says we don't need drones, we can do it all ourselves. And I would say probably in the middle. We're going to go out with these drones, but we're ultimately going to be in charge of it. So you can help mitigate risk. Maybe we'll stay a little bit further back and give the drones a little bit higher threat missions in there. But you absolutely need a pilot in the loop. And to say, right now we have like MQ-9 Predators. They're, pilots are flying from trailers in Vegas. I would say that anything is jammable. So if you need a signal to go from that trailer in Vegas all the way to, the Yellow Sea, there's a lot of different avenues that you can use to jam that signal. So these drones or aircraft are going to have to be able to make decisions on their own. And we're not even close to them being able to make all the decisions that a fighter pilot or, any person can make on the fly. I would say not even a quarter of the way there. So maybe in 2100, if I
that far out, huh?
If I was a betting man, maybe 2100 is going to be the last of the fighter pilots. And as we get closer and closer, drones will do more and more things. But we're not even close.
Do you think it'll move? Do you think it'll move into AI-driven aircraft, or do you think it'll become remotely piloted aircraft first? I feel like it would become remotely piloted first, because why risk putting a guy out there if we don't have to?
Well, we have that right now. We have the MQ-9s. So
yeah, but an MQ-9 is not an F-16.
Yeah. Okay. Remotely piloted fighters.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about on like a different level. I don't know. I see, you mentioned in one of your other videos, you talk about the S curve of like technology going through its like cycle of development and stuff like that. And I feel like we're where you're talking about at the beginning of that S curve, where a lot of the mistakes are being made. A lot of the money's being used right now because we got to get a good foundation of understanding and like technological capability before we can, push on to the things that we really want to do. I mean, would you agree with that? Do you think we're at the beginning of this rather than like farther along, like some people believe?
For sure. We're at the very infancy of this, especially when it comes to combat, especially when it comes to Yeah, especially when it comes to combat, we're at the infancy. We're at the very beginning of this S curve. So as opposed to trying to replace fighter pilots with this, this technology that isn't fully developed, I would be a strong proponent of trying to find ways that it can help to augment the fighter pilot. And so, yeah, that might be one pilot going out with a couple of drones, being able to control them. I think that's pretty useful. I think since the beginning of probably of the computer, so I'd say probably the F-16 first electric jet, they did a lot of things in that aircraft that helped to automate things for the pilot. One of them, with the flight control system, they had auto trimming, so it would auto trim wherever you wanted to go to 1G. So I mean that, I'm sure they had to deal with F4 pilots saying, you're not a real pilot, you're not a man, flying that thing. You don't even have to trim the thing. So now with the F-35, we've taken, a big step forward where it's able to automate a lot of the data management so that the pilot can really cleanly see the information and data. So I think, if I were king for a day, I would be investing heavily in AI, but as a way to augment, pilots and use the best thing that we have is our brains to be able to make creative decisions. Mm-hmm. That's what I would do, with maybe the ultimate goal, in 2080, we're talking, super far away, of fully replacing them. But if you're trying to replace them right away, I think it's going to turn out like, the missiles in Vietnam, where, they took the gun off the F4 and they just had, air-to-air missiles on them, and they didn't work as well as they thought it would work. So I think that, if you try to go in with a fully autonomous fleet, that's what's going to happen right now. So, just having lived this life for a while, I don't think we're even close to being able to go to a fully autonomous, Air Force. And I'm a big proponent of technology. I think that's, technology has augmented me. I'm able to fly 100 times faster than I can run, carry 100 times more, much more capable than I could without this, machine around me. But it's a whole different animal if you want it to do all this stuff on its own.
Yeah. I think, man, in the next 20 years, the changes in technology that AI is going to bring is going to be mind blowing. That's why I don't know if 2100 is. I think that might be too far out. I feel like it could be sooner than that, just because of the rapid pace of technological developments. It's going to be weird where something like that, like flight, is going to become like a novelty. Like why would a human ever fly a plane? That's crazy. That's crazy talk. Elon Musk said the same thing about cars. He's like, I think he said in like 100 years or whatever, people are going to look back and be like, I can't believe we allowed people to drive these monster machines themselves. These like giant death machines. What
was it? 50,000 people a year die from that. I think it's one of the leading causes of death.
Yeah. So it's like, the perspective we have on it's way different than the people of the future when they look back and be like, what? Like, why would you ever do that? That's crazy talk.
Yeah. It's like, you had to hunt your own bison with like a spear, that's crazy to think about right now. So yeah, I mean, 2100 might be, I would say 21, and who knows, there's so much uncertainty involved with this. I'm just trying to illustrate the point that, it's going to be a long time, and it's going to be that S curve where, the inflection is going to go up. We're going to make some really seamless teams between AI, wingmen and aircraft. And then maybe, 2080s or something, it's going to be like, we're going to, there's going to be our grandchildren are going to have this conversation of like, you're really not cutting it as a pilot anymore. Maybe we can just get rid of you. But to think, these tech companies are getting billion-dollar valuations saying that they can get rid of fighter pilots in 5 years. That's not going to happen.
No.
For example, the F-35 the X-35 flew in 2001. It didn't get IOC, initial operating capability, till 2017. That's like 16-year cycle. I think the F-22 was like a 15-year cycle. The development for these aircraft is crazy. It takes a really long time to be able to do that. And like in the DoD, the decision cycles to be able to change things is much slower. So maybe a company like Apple or Google or Tesla could make a fighter in maybe 20, 40 that can replace the fighter pilot. But imagine, having to go through the DoD and being able to go through the bureaucracy and then being, seeing the last, fighter pilot. I would say, if I were to bet, I'd say 2100 isn't too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. It'd be not unlike SpaceX coming in and being like, "Hey, we're just going to build our own rockets." Like, you guys did all this over here. That's cool. We'll take what we know from that and just our own perspective. Coming at it from a completely different perspective rather than these career military people or career like government engineer people working on a project. When you bring in a civilian sector side, they're just going to look at it in a different way. And, I don't know, maybe they will come in with some crazy, could you imagine a Tesla? What would it look like? It'd be like an X-Wing fighter or something like that. Cause Elon Musk is a big nerd.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'd be great. And I think that's really where the DoD is headed. I think it was really the 1990s that all the primes got, merged, and we went from like 30 primes to like 3. Lockheed,
what do you mean?
Boeing.
What do you mean by primes?
Primes are like Northrop Grumman, all these different these different companies that made different aircraft. So
Gotcha.
There's like 30 different aircraft manufacturers in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And in the 90s, we consolidated to really 3 major primes like Lockheed, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman. So basically, you have 3 different companies. Boeing specializes in the big planes, Lockheed in the fighters, Northrop in the bombers. So you really know where the contract's going. So compare that to the civilian industry where you have, Apple, you have Google, you have all these different companies competing. Same with the car manufacturers. Competition is a great thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think really the DoD recognized this, at least in the late 2000s, and they've been really trying to bring in more civilian companies. That's what I was doing with the Defense Innovation Unit. They're like, all right, we have a lot of problems within the DoD. How do we bridge that gap and just get civilian companies to solve these problems for 10 times cheaper? We don't need a, $1 million toilet seat. Like, how do we get these guys to just do a commercial off the shelf type application? So I absolutely think that's the future. The difficulty is, classified stuff, it really stovepipes mm-hmm. things. So
yeah,
that makes it really difficult for, Justin LLC to go and try and, build a new missile or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. I like what you're talking about where you're saying, like, how can we use this off the shelf stuff and make it work? Because that's really how we won like World War II and these older wars, is because none of this stuff was like so crazy technologically advanced. Like a lot of this stuff was just easy stuff. Like, hey, Ford can make this pretty easily. Let's just have them, let's have them do it. And I like what you're talking about with the competition. Like if we're talking about the car side, you have your big car manufacturers, you got your Ford, your GM and stuff like that. But there's so many like little tiny car manufacturers in the civilian market. Those aren't your only choices. You don't have to go with one of those. So yeah, I think that could only bring, again, it's all about perspectives. If you're looking at defense stuff, you want to bring in multiple perspectives because there may be something that you're not seeing because you've only been looking at it from one way, and you bring in a smaller company that's working in a different environment because they may not have the fiscal like abilities that a giant corporation does, or they may have different kind of technologies that they're working with. They may see something completely different because of their perspective. So that's really good. And it's good to hear that the government and the military understands that, and they're putting together, like, would you call it the defense? What is it? DIU?
Defense Innovation Unit.
What all did you guys work with in that? Or what you could talk about?
We work with physiological monitoring. So there's a whole bunch of different programs going on there. And to be fair, like there's still a ton of work to be done. The acquisition process is a huge bureaucracy. So this is just an initiative to try and minimize that and go with these commercial companies. But what I was doing was helping with the physiological monitoring devices. So, we have these incredible planes that can see out to the horizon. They can, they have all these sensors on them. There's nothing on the pilot, nothing. So, we can at least get like a heart rate monitor and blood oxygen monitor, because we've suffered from a lot of hypoxia incidences. So we make our own oxygen. We don't use liquid oxygen anymore. And these are complex systems. And when they fail, the pilot can get hypoxic. You can pass out, and we've had pilots die from that. Similar thing to G-LOCs, G-induced loss of consciousness. We're pulling up to 9 Gs, 9 times the force of gravity. So that's like 1,800 pounds just crushing you. And it's longitudinally, so along, if you're standing up from your head to your toes, so it's pulling that blood out of your brain. And if you lose enough of it, you'll pass out. And we've had a lot of pilots die because of that. So there's nothing monitoring the pilot. So they're like, well, there's a lot of commercial stuff. You can put an Apple Watch on somebody and do better than what we're doing right now. So we were working with a couple different companies through the Defense Innovation Unit. One was like ear cups that could measure heart rate and blood oxygen level. Another was a shirt that can measure your breathing, as well as some other things. And then there was a third one that could measure oxygen in your brain. And so the infancy, the basic building block right here is letting the pilot know when they're messed up. And it'll let you know when you're hypoxic, then you can descend and you can get better. Far-ranging applications, going back to our previous conversation, is I think that this can be a good interface with recognizing when pilots are getting task overload, when they're getting saturated with different tasks. You can monitor that, and then now you can use AI in there to help offload some of that to either a wingman or a computer going forward. So there's a lot of different applications. Right now we have zero stuff monitoring the pilot. So
that is pretty wild. I would have
foot in the door.
I would have guessed that they had something on a pilot. That's kind of crazy to think that. Like, you're right. Just throwing an Apple Watch on somebody would be just as just a step ahead. And it's giving, like you were saying before, it gives you those more data points. And then, I mean, you'll start off with some basic information that you can kind of derive from that. But as you get more and more data, there's probably a lot of stuff that's really useful for us to know that we just don't even realize we could have that information, because we haven't tracked it. It's kind of crazy.
As another example, so I was working with the 19th Air Force. So we revamped pilot training for like the first time in 60 years. So we're now doing a whole bunch of new things. One of them is incorporating like some of this physiological monitoring into pilots that are in simulators. You can monitor how their body's reacting. We know what a stress curve looks like, and we know that people behave best when there's a little bit of stress, but not too much. So you can monitor how the pilot's doing. And when they're getting a little bit too much stress, you can say that's an area where they might need to be a little bit better at. So we've started doing that. At least when I was at Det 24 is kind of like the skunk works of Air Force pilot training, trying all kinds of new things. And so, yeah, that's going to be a huge factor. And then talking to AI, the way I see it is you're going to have AI to be able to tell you how you're doing your maneuvers, and you'll get a grade on it. You'll see how you're doing. You'll see how your body's handling the stress, and then between those, you'll be able to see what you need to work on and how you're doing compared to other pilots.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. The technology that we have nowadays is just kind of insane. I want to shift, I guess, a little bit and just kind of ask some general questions. What's the fastest you've ever gone in a plane? Or is that
the fastest I've ever gone is Mach 1.9. So 1.9 times the speed of sound, probably about 1,500 miles an hour. And, these planes, F-16 rated Mach 2.05, but we don't get a chance to fly it that often. So I have a model over my right shoulder right here, and you can see there's all kinds of stuff hanging off it. So a clean jet with nothing on it can fly Mach 2. But once you start putting on fuel tanks, targeting pods, we had APKWS, those laser rockets in Afghanistan. That's like a trash can on the wing. Once you start putting that stuff on there, like the max speed decreases dramatically. And you're also burning a ton of fuel. You're burning like 50,000 pounds an hour when you're in max afterburner. You only carry like 7,000 pounds of fuel. So you need to be really efficient. So anyway, I've probably only flown a clean jet, maybe with the F-16, maybe 5 times in my career. And so one of them was in Korea. I was doing some tests because it was coming out of maintenance. And on the last step of the checklist, it calls for a max speed run just to make sure that, everything's good to go. And so, yeah, I was able to go up to like 25,000 feet, light the afterburner, climb at about Mach 1 to 50,000 feet, which is the service ceiling. You can easily go higher, but if the canopy depressurizes, then you'll, like we were talking earlier, go hypoxic pretty much immediately. So, so that's a service ceiling. And then I was able to, in max afterburner, bunt over and dive and get up to 1.9 Mach. The whole jet was shaking at about 1.8 Mach, 1.6 Mach. So, I mean, that was a really cool experience. Once I was going Mach 1.9, though, everything kind of quieted down. Everything went smoothly. And I started feeling heat from the canopy. So I put my hand out, I had a Nomex glove on, and I could feel some of the heat transferring through the canopy, through my glove to my hand. So that was the fastest I ever gone.
What a wild experience that is. That's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Do you get nervous like when you're talking about the aircraft is kind of shaky and stuff like that? I'm sure you expect that, but when you're actually doing it, is there like a, oh shit, I hope this doesn't, fall apart on me?
For sure, because the max speed was set for a new aircraft, and so this was back in 2000 and I think 2012, 2013, and the aircraft I was flying was built in the late 80s. So, that's an old aircraft to see how fast you can fly. And so, yeah, definitely when it was shaking, I was like, is this good? And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna push through it, see what happens. And so, yeah,
That's crazy, man. That's pretty wild. What's the fastest that you can like eject out of an F-16? Because obviously, I can't imagine that's safe to eject at 1.9 at Mach 1.9.
No, you would just turn into jelly.
That's what I figured.
So at Mach, I don't know at 1.9, but 1.6 Mach. So if you stick your hand out of a car going highway speed 70 miles an hour, it is 300 times that force on your body at Mach 1.6. So, I mean, you're going to break every bone in your body. I think there was an F-15 pilot that ejected at Mach 1, and he pretty much broke every bone in his body. So,
he
yeah.
lived, right?
He lived. I think there's another one that ejected at Mach 1, and he broke, every bone in his body, and he would have survived, but he ended up drowning in the water because he couldn't swim after, that experience. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of steps in the checklist for us if we have to eject. Obviously, you eject if you have to, but the biggest one is just slowing down because the airspeed is exponential to the force on your body. So if you can get it down to, 200 knots, something like that, 250 knots, you have a much higher chance of surviving than, anytime you're Mach 1 plus, man, it's not good. You're not going to do well. You're probably never going to fly again. And it's already a terrible experience. Fortunately, knock on wood, I haven't had to eject, but most pilots are about 2 inches shorter for, I don't know how much longer, for a couple weeks after they eject, because it's like 20 G's just going right through your spine straight down when you eject. And a lot of pilots break their backs.
I've heard that. I have one of my buddies is an F-18 pilot, and he was saying broken backs and broken legs is pretty common for guys that have ejected.
Flailing injuries, yeah. I mean, the F-35, we have some lanyards because the Marine version has to auto eject because they hover. So we have to wear jackets when we fly, which is terrible in like Phoenix because it's like 120 degrees on the ramp. But yeah, we have lanyards that can pull our arms in if we have to eject, which hopefully will prevent the flailing injuries.
Wow, that's crazy. So it basically snaps you in tight?
Yeah. It snaps your arms in. Does it snap your arms in? I think it just prevents your arms from flailing. So I don't think those lanyards snap in, but I think your leg ones do. So they have big loops that you stick your legs through. They just kind of go around the cutout for your legs. And so if you eject, it'll pull those legs in. And then I think the lanyards for your arms just prevent you from flailing and throwing your shoulder out.
Man, do you know many people that have ejected?
I know a handful, maybe 5 or 10 or so. So, I mean, it's not super common, but F-16, we've lost so many over the years. The 1970s jet, talking about the S curve, like early on, there were a lot of bugs in that jet to work out. And we've had a lot of pilots eject. I mean, there were years where they were crashing every 3 weeks. So imagine if social media was around then, like they probably would have canceled it.
Well, in the last couple of years, it seems like there's been a lot of air incidents, a lot of crashes, student pilots crashing, experienced pilots crashing, not just jets, helicopters, Ospreys. We had an Osprey crew get killed recently in the Marine Corps. it's like every other military job where there's an inherent danger to it just because of the job. What can we do as the government, as a military service, as individual services, to ensure that every time the pilot steps in the cockpit, he's as safe as possible? Like, we're putting you in a safe aircraft. Or, I don't know, what's your take? You're a pilot, man. This is your everyday life. What do you see? What do you think when you see like one crash after another? Like some weeks there's like more than one crash. And it's like, oh man, it's got to go through your head at some point. Like, oh shit,
Yeah. I mean, it is really unfortunate. I think it all goes back to training. So that's something that I was fortunate to be able to help with the F-35, is to help develop the syllabus. And I mean, these aircraft are really advanced. There's a lot of stuff that people didn't have to do in the 90s with their F-16 or 70s with the F-16. Like, we're expecting people to essentially be like team leads, controlling 20 aircraft potentially pretty quickly after they, become F-35 pilots. So maybe probably 2 years down the road, they could find themselves controlling 20 aircraft. So there's just a lot of different bells and whistles on these. And so we only have a limited number of flights. And so a lot of those flights now have to go towards some of these more advanced missions. So, I mean, it's a balance finding it. Do you want them to be really good at taking off and landing? Obviously that's important, but is that going to help you when you actually go into some sort of near peer adversary? So, I think ultimately it comes down to more training, but that costs a lot of money, especially with these 5th-gen fighters. They're super expensive to fly. So I would say more training, and then retaining the experienced pilots you have. So we're losing a lot of pilots. So we don't have a problem with recruiting pilots right now. Tons of people lining up to become fighter pilots, but we have a problem retaining them because it's a pretty tough lifestyle. Probably as as a JTAC, I knew some JTACs that had been to Afghanistan like 7 times in 7 years. Like, that's not a great way to retain your talent. And so just finding ways to increase quality of life, everything from IT stuff, computer stuff, like, spending 20 minutes to log on to your computer, getting rid of those additional duties, to, finding ways to stay in and not, go to the airlines, because the airlines are hiring and they're paying a lot of money right now because they have the whole, the baby boomers are now retiring. So there's this huge gap. So they are paying a ton of money right now. And so you have fighter pilots who, have had to move every 3 years for the last, 10, 15 years. It's a very busy lifestyle. So they, get out, they go to the airlines. Personally, for me, the reserves have been kind of the savior for me, because that's a way for me to still fly, still serve, but also to do these other things that I really wanted to do.
Yeah. I think that's the way a lot of people feel, especially if you have like a specialized job. If you become really good at it, then they want to use you all the time because you're really good at your job, which is cool. I enjoyed being a JTAC. I enjoyed doing things and going training and the deploying and stuff like that. But you also are a human, and you do want to break, and you do want to like have a family and stuff. So yeah, I totally get that. I had a buddy who's a Harrier pilot, and he became our air officer for my team at Anglico as his like B billet time frame. They have like 2 years where they have to go do something else. And he wasn't sure if he was going to go back and fly when he was done, because he's like, dude, it's an awesome job, but he's like, every time you go up, you just don't know what's going to happen, because 1, it's just inherently dangerous. 2, every ride, every flight, you're getting graded on something. People that are outside of the like this kind of community may not realize. We talked a little bit earlier at the beginning about going out and getting your qualifications, and your everything signed off on, like, hey, yeah, you flew at night, you dropped ordnance at night, you have to get approved to do all these different things. People may not realize you have to get certified to do all these different tasks, and if you don't, then hey, you don't drop ordnance at night now until you do get certified. And so I can see how that he's like, it's just so much stress all the time. Like, if it was nothing else, if it was just flying, like taking off, and then you can just go fly and have a good time, then it'd be one thing. But that's not it. It's the military version of it. So
yeah,
I'm sure you can relate to that. I mean, what do you say to guys that may be feeling that as pilots? Like, do you try to encourage people to stay in? You know, like, hey, we want to retain this talent, or are you like, hey man, I get it, you don't want to do it anymore, just see you later?
Oh man, I think it's a personal decision. So I think it's whatever people want to do. Everybody's going to kind of have their different path. I would say definitely that there's not just one path now, which is what it was like even 10 years ago. Like if if you didn't want to stay in, you'd probably have an uncomfortable conversation with your commander. And now, it's not encouraged, but it's, how, if you want to go join the reserves, if you want to get out, I think people are a lot more understanding now of that. But we need to keep people in. Like it costs a lot of money. It costs, I think it's close to $10 million just to make F-35 pilot, just a basic one that can't do anything. And then maybe like $50 million to make a full-up instructor pilot. So it's crazy amounts of money. And even more than the money, it's the pipeline. Like it takes like 5 years to make a fully qualified F-35 instructor pilot. So it takes a really long time. So we need those people to stay in. When somebody leaves and goes to the airlines, man, that's a huge hit for the military. So we need to do whatever we can to keep people in. Personally, I think the reserves have been awesome. And I don't know if we are increasing the percentage of reserve forces. So I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I think that is a great way to retain talent. And there are some incredible fighter pilots doing great work that are kind of holding this glue together or that are the glue holding this whole thing together because, there's a lot of bureaucracy and, at the end of the day, it's the fighter pilot that is kind of risking their life and going and flying this thing. And so we have a few people that are really holding the whole community together. And so we need those people to stay in. So I think it's a tough problem right now. When I was working with the 19th Air Force, we were solving the back end of that problem of how do we increase the production, which we've maxed it out. So we went from like 1,000 to 1,500 through all kinds of cool, creative ways. But we need to really solve that back end and find ways to keep people in. And there's ways to do that. For instance, the reserves. I don't want to make this a commercial for the reserves, but it has been a great thing for me because I can stay in one location. Moving all the time, that's really tough on the family. So I can stay in one location. I can either be full-time and just be like an active duty person, or I can be part-time like I'm doing now and fly once a week. And then the rest of the time I could do the airlines. I could do whatever I want to do as well. You definitely don't get paid nearly as much to do that, but it's your choice. So I think just having a spectrum of choices is probably the best way to do it and not forcing people to go down one path. And I think we're getting there. It's just, we probably need to do it a little faster.
You're not the first person to come on and kind of hype up the reserves. I actually had General Bellin on, who's the Marine Corps Reserve Commanding General. And he obviously had great things to say about it. It's talking about the Marine Corps Reserves and some of the new opportunities that are coming up and everything. I think it's a good segue for guys that are coming off of active duty, but don't necessarily want to fully let go of the military. And maybe if you're going to get out and you want to go use your GI Bill and stuff like that, it's a good way to get some income on the side while you're going to school. I think it's a great, there's a lot of opportunities there. And like what you're saying, in the reserves, you can pick your unit, which inherently means if you have a certain job, you're almost picking your billet that you could basically stay in as long as you want. That's a big thing for Marine Corps JTACs is being a JTAC is not a MOS. I mean, it's an additional MOS. So a lot of times once you've been a JTAC for 3 years, the Marine Corps goes, all right, that was cool. Now we're going to send you to go be a recruiter, or we're going to bring you back to the artillery community and do this other stuff. Not many guys make it beyond 3 or 4 years as a JTAC. They get pulled in to go do. It's crazy, right? Because
that
3
is
or 4.
Crazy. It's such a specialized skill set.
3 or 4 years is when you really start to be like, I got it. I can understand how all this kind of comes together. And then they're like, cool, now go be a recruiter in Tulsa, Oklahoma, bro.
Man, that's crazy. So they're looking at changing that?
Well, I mean, they say they are. That's something that even while I was in, we've been talking about, like that needs to be a primary MOS. Once you become a JTAC, you become JTAC qualified, you need to stay in that MOS because like being a pilot, it's expensive. You're talking spending $1 million to get this guy trained up to become I knew a guy who went to TACP school, got JTAC certified, came back to the unit, and he was going through his final training phase. I can't remember what it's called. God, I feel like an idiot. that I don't remember. But he was going through his final training phases back at the unit so that he would be certified to go drop bombs on his own and designated. He was going through his designation phase. And before he'd finished his designation phase, he got orders from the monitor saying he got selected for recruiting duty. So he went through all this training and never even got to use it. Then you go to recruiting and you're there for 2 years and you come back and none of your qualifications are good anymore. So it's like, so anyways, what I was getting at was in the reserves, you can go to like a reserve Anglico unit and go over there as a JTAC or as a, and become like a team chief or whatever if you're enlisted and just stay in that job for many years rather than in the Marine Corps, in the active duty side, you could get shifted around. It's not like the Air Force, man. The Air Force TECP community, JTAC community, like the way they structure it is way better than the Marine Corps. I personally like our training and stuff a little bit better, or the way that we do what we do, because we like to do combined arms. We like to bring in mortars. We like to bring in artillery with, our airstrikes and stuff like that. I like that portion of it. I wish our manpower management was more like the Air Force, because I think like the Air Force gives bonuses to their JTACs, like monthly bonuses and stuff, because it's a tough job. It's a stressful job. And like pilots, after a while, you're like, you know what? I don't want to do this. It was not uncommon to be someone like me who hit 12 years and was like, I'm done. I'm too stressed out. I'm gone a lot. And the guys that were before me had it way worse than I did.
That's crazy. That is really crazy. JTAC's such a specialized skill set. Like I think of, you said you had a lot of JTACs that listen. When we were in Afghanistan, a guy named Nasty, I won't use his last name, but probably people know him. I mean, he was instrumental in us being able to execute there, because it was early 2017. Mattis had just taken over. Things had switched, and he had been there 7 times. So like we were really leaning heavily on him to be able to adapt our tactics to what was going on. So I can't imagine just 3 years and being done.
It's crazy, right?
For that, because we needed this guy. Like he was pretty much one of the leaders for our squadron.
And it's different because it is a primary MOS in the Air Force. So most of the Marine Corps JTACs are 0861s or fire support men, or whatever you want to call it, forward observers. They come from the artillery community and they're used to calling in mortars, they're used to calling for fire for artillery and naval gunfire. And the thinking was like, hey, these guys are already observers. When they were talking about enlisted JTACs, they're like, these guys are already trained observers. We just have to teach them how to talk to the aircraft. They already know how to get target location and all this other stuff. So the 0861 community kind of became the bulk of the Marine Corps JTACs. You have some guys from Recon that go to TCP school. You have some guys from MARSOC that go to TCP school. Every once in a while you'll get an infantry officer that'll go, but it's not common. Most of the guys are from the artillery community. And what they do is you become a JTAC as a sergeant. Most of the time you get screened as a sergeant, and then you'll spend, when the wars were going on, they wanted you to do 2 deployments. And after your second deployment as a JTAC, you most of the time either went back to the fires community as an artillery chief. You're now the fires chief for the unit, or you went on to go be like a recruiter or whatever else, B-billet that you might have to go do. But yeah, they take you out of that position and they're like, dude, I've had to fight with operations officers on why I needed to maintain my certification as a JTAC evaluator. They're like, why would we send him ashore to get controls? It's like, dude, there's not very many of us, man. You got to understand what you're saying here, so I don't want to go down a rabbit hole bitching about.
We have, at least in the reserves, we have quite a few ex-Marine and Navy guys, and I guess the Navy guys get tired of the ship, and Marine guys, kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. I mean, I know a lot of guys that were JTACs and Joint Fires Observers, the JFOs, that were like, this is cool, but the Air Force has more opportunities. It's easier to get in to work with SOCOM and stuff like that if you work with the Air Force or the Army. So it's not uncommon. I actually have a video on my YouTube channel where a guy that was a Marine motor team mechanic, decided to leave the Marine Corps as a staff sergeant, I think after he got done with being a drill instructor or something like that, and transferred to the Air Force TCP program. And he goes into detail there. But yeah, it's weird, man.
I mean, we're not perfect either. So, I mean, we have a lot to work on. But, I mean, it's just such a specialized skill. you can't do it outside. So I think outside of the military. So I think, yeah, I think reserves are a good solution to be able to solve that problem.
For sure. For sure. Well, this has been a really great conversation, man. I want to give you an opportunity to plug your book and your upcoming book, I guess, and your different channels if you want to do that.
I mean, I don't need to plug it. If people want to, if people want to watch the YouTube channel, you can just type in Hazard. There's some pretty cool things in there. And then, yeah, I have a book coming out on decision making and basically apply a lot of the principles, the institutional principles that I've learned to everyday life. And so I think I struggled with decision making before I became a pilot. I think being a pilot is a really good chance where you are flying by yourself. You need to solve all the problems on your own. And so I think over time, you become pretty good at making decisions. And so combine that with the institutional knowledge that they give you. I think, at least I've seen that it's really helped me in my everyday life. So I wrote the book on how to apply those principles. So that'll be coming out in May. So we're doing some cool things. We're giving away 2,500 book plates. Nice. That I flew in the F-16 with. So that'll be cool. That'll come with every book for the first 2,500. And then we're still working out some of the details, but we're going to make a video of it. But one person is going to get a flight in a fighter, and we'll be able to fight each other. So
that'll be sick.
I don't want to give away too much with that, but yeah, that'll be a really fun one.
One of my buddies that was with First Anglico, they went out to Mountain Home to do an exercise out there, and he's like, dude, we showed up, with the Anglico team. He's like, we showed up, and they're like, hey, let's go to the squadron bar, and then they're like drinking with them and stuff, and it's like, hey, you want to fly tomorrow? And he's like, yeah, sure, thinking the guy wasn't serious or whatever. And then the next day he's like, all right, let's get all your stuff ready, and like threw him in I think it's one of the 2-seater F-16s. And he's like, bro, it was the scariest thing ever. He's like, it was cool for like 5 minutes, and then it was like, this is horrible,
Yeah. I probably gave a dozen people flights in the F-16, and yeah, every one of them kind of hated life for a little bit afterwards. And I wasn't, I would ask them, do you want it easy? Do you want it hard? Some would say, just keep it easy. I kept it under 3 Gs for one of the flights, but still, the woman in the back was puking the whole time. And then there were some other ones where they're like, I want to puke. And I'm like, all right, you got it, as long as everything goes in the bag. But this won't be in an Air Force aircraft, so we're renting a couple of them. But
still sounds like a great time, man.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
That's good stuff, man. I think what you're doing is awesome. I like the channel. I like the information. I'm fascinated with pilots and stuff. I think that's such a wild job to have, and it's interesting to hear the perspective. Some of the most efficient and professional people I've ever met were pilots. It feels like they come in ready to do whatever the task is. There's no bullshitting around. It's like, let's get it done. What do we got to do? They're so efficient. I just have a lot of respect for, both the fixed wing and rotary wing pilots. And I think it's great that you're putting out the information so other people can see the cool stuff that you guys get to do and the kind of stressful stuff that comes along with being a fighter pilot. You're given like a full perspective. And I just wish you luck with that in the future. Everybody, you can check out my page. It's at Former Action Guys and at Former Action News on Instagram. jkramergraphics.com is my website. And go to patreon.com and support the show at Former Action Guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. All right. That's it.